Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Emotional Health Through Healthy Conversation. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, we ask that you take a few moments to read the following slide about information received today. I will now go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. We have taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presentation by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. Questions will be addressed at the end of today's webinar. At the close of today's webinar, you will also receive a survey on the presentation. We appreciate you providing us your feedback. I would now like to introduce your presenter, Anne Whatley-Dale, founder, principal and managing director of Livepresent, to give today's webinar, Emotional Health Through Healthy Conversation. Anne teaches, writes and speaks about healthy relationships at work and at play. Her background includes health consulting, personal development, plus corporate training and coaching in sales and service, communication, and managing challenging situations. Anne channels her experience into a focus on organisational health and personal wellness through Livepresent. Today, Anne will share with you what she has learned as a health consultant, speaker, workplace consultant, trainer, business owner, sometimes athlete, and mother. She invites you to look at the world differently, to face your fears and open your mind to better ways of living, working, and communicating. One relationship, one conversation at a time. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Stephanie. I hope everyone is enjoying their Wednesday morning. So let's get started on our journey to looking at how emotional health and healthy conversations relate to each other. The principles that we're going to talk about are focused on not only work roles, which of course is one of our primary focus points, they also relate though to the other roles that we play both inside the home and outside the home and right throughout our lives. So the first thing I want to just get you to have a think about for a minute is this expression here: who we are and how we are impacts what we do and how we do it. And what that's really saying is that our emotional health, or how we feel, impacts how well we can do our jobs and find our voice, whether it's at work or outside of work, and vice versa. So how well we do our jobs and how we're feeling about the work that we're doing has a total impact on our emotional health as well. So if you've ever had a moment or a day where you felt like this or supported someone who has, you'll know exactly what I mean about that two-way flow between how we feel and how we do our jobs and live our lives, and how we're working can also impact on how we feel. And it can take one simple conversation, as we all know, that can have us going from a totally happy place and feeling really good about what we're doing and good about ourselves to a place where we're not feeling so good. So what I'd like to introduce you to is the Wellness Wellbeing Barometer, which is something that I've developed over a number of years to really portray the relationship between our emotions, the roles that we play in life, and also our overall wellness and the different areas of wellness. So you'll see from the first side of this Wellbeing Barometer card that emotions and emotional health sit right at the core of wellness, and then we work through ourself and our roles, financial wellness, and then on the outside we have each of the other areas of wellness that we can work on in our lives. The reason that the other areas sit on the outside is because if we look at emotional well-being and emotional wellness, if we have that right, or we can have a feeling that that's right, and we're moving in and out of that, and we look at how we're playing our roles in life, and we look at financial wellness, then if we've got those three things in some degree of balance, then that allows us to be able to work on the other areas of wellness and well-being. Really what that's saying is it's really challenging to have full wellness and well-being if we don't have these other three things in place. As a great example of that, if you think about any time in your life where there's been any degree of financial pressure, and I'm not talking about how many zeros is on the end of the amount of money you have in your bank balance. It can be no zeros, and a person can have a sense of wellness or well-being because they're totally that financial wellness is still okay for them. So it's not about how much money we have, it's about the level of financial wellness in relation to what we need. And that can be such a big stressor in our lives, and something that has a direct flow-on impact straight back to our emotional well-being, and of course in between that, how we're living our lives and doing our jobs. So the other side of this card is just talking about each of those areas. There is a handout for this barometer, so that you'll be able to see this in a little bit more detail at your leisure. So emotions are one of those things that obviously there are many different sorts, and the way that we express them can have a total impact on our day, our moments, our lives. So let's take a look at emotions. So if we think about emotions, emotions are a big part of who we are, but there's something that we're not used to expressing. And yet emotional health lies at the heart of almost everything that we do, and certainly lies at the heart of wellness. So we're often told that we shouldn't express our emotions. Don't be emotional, hide your emotions. It's not appropriate to be emotional at work, all those types of things. And if you've ever had a moment where you feel those emotions bubbling up and you know that you can't express them because it's inappropriate, that's a whole lot different than feeling the emotions bubbling up and feeling that you can't do it because it's just not going to be accepted, whatever environment that you're in. Because what happens is when we can't express our emotions is that we can bottle them up and they will come out somewhere. So expressing our emotions, or first of all, understanding our emotions, comes back to being able to realize that there are a whole range of emotions that we can experience on a daily basis. And often we don't even recognize what those emotions are. How we express them, if we don't, as I said before, if we don't express them at the time, or we don't work out how to express them in a healthy way, they can come out at times in the wrong way. So going back to the slide that I had up before of the fist punching something, that can be an extreme reaction where somebody has just had so much emotion building up that the only way that they can release it is by some act of force. That might be throwing something, or it might be just having a blow up verbally at work, or in any sort of conversation. So that's not really a healthy conversation. So to be able to express our emotions in the best possible way, we need to develop an emotional vocabulary. And that's something that we don't necessarily do because we're told so often that it's not okay to express our emotions. So when we have an opportunity to do that, we're not quite sure what to do. Now, there's some great resources around, and one of the resources that I love is a book which is titled The Language of Emotions, and that's by a lady by the name of Carla McLaren. Now, there is a handout that you'll be getting, which is, let me just show you. You might not be able to see this very well during the presentation. As I said, it will be coming to you as a handout. Carla McLaren, in her book, The Language of Emotions, talks about how we need to really be able to develop this vocabulary. And one of the things that she talks about is that being able to do this can be quite challenging. And so if you're in a situation where you want to talk to someone about how they're feeling or how you're feeling about something, and you think that the other person is going to react easily or might be offended by what you say, these are some words that you can have a look at using, which might just help the situation, not be too confronting, be a little bit general in some ways, and you'll see what I mean by that in a second. So the interesting thing about these words is that you can move from gentle emotionally expressive words, like, for example, if we're angry, we might say that we're peeved or annoyed. But if we move into words that are a little bit more general and less confronting, we get to what Carla calls the wonder weasels, which are the words stressed, bad, or unhappy, and the lesser weasels, which are upset and hurt. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the emotions and where these words can be used, those 5 words, stressed, bad, unhappy, upset, and hurt, can be used to describe almost all emotions. The 3 that they don't cover are contentment, happiness, and joy, for obvious reasons, because we would all hope that we're not using stressed, bad, unhappy, upset, or hurt to express contentment, happiness, or joy. So if you think, have a look at the different range of emotions that we can express, and you see that we can use the same range of words for most of our emotions, is it any wonder that we need to develop our emotional vocabulary? So what we're really saying is that having a higher degree of emotional health, or the highest degree of emotional health possible, means that we have the greatest possibility of being able to feel in charge of our interactions and our work and of ourselves. So let's have a look at roles, the second layer of our wellness and wellbeing barometer. We play so many different roles in life. We play roles at work, we play roles at home, we might be a parent, a friend, a partner. We play roles in the community. We might be a volunteer. All of the different roles that we play, they all deserve our proper engagement at the time that we're playing them. Now, that can be a really challenging thing. And I know when you're at work how easy it can be to be able to be thinking about what's going on outside of work, or when we're with our partners or our children, how easily it is to be thinking of things that we need to be doing at work. If we're on holidays, we're thinking about things that aren't to do with our holiday. So really, what I like to think about in the roles that we play is the importance of engagement. And the way that I define engagement is it's the energy to be present. And what that's really saying is that we're totally in the role that we're playing at that moment in time. We're so fully engaged in it that we don't really know anything else is going on. And just as a bit of an aside, how I came about this definition was when my son was about 4 years old, and I was running around grabbing things to get to work, and I was running late. And I looked at my son, who was sitting there waiting for me to take him to daycare, and I realised that he didn't really care about me running around trying to grab my things to get to work, or whether I had the right clothes on, or whatever. All he cared about was that I was mum. And it really brought me back to that reality point of how important it is to be engaged in the role that we're in, not be exhibiting presenteeism where we're there physically, but we're not there mentally. So engagement is really, really one of those vital things to be able to help us to not only have good conversations, but to be able to do everything well. So why is it important? Because it does help us to be the best that we can be, to be able to do our best and to be the best with others. How do we achieve it? Well, that's a bit of a personal journey, I guess, for each of us. Sometimes it comes back to the knowledge of what it is that we need to be doing. It comes back to an awareness of how we need to communicate. And sometimes it just basically comes back to saying, I'm not going to allow any other interruptions. I'm turning off the technology. I'm going to do what I need to do at this moment in time to the exclusion of all else. The benefits of it are many and varied. One of them, in relation to what we're talking about here, is safety and emotional well-being, good communication, quality interactions with people, quality relationships with people, and above all, we feel good about ourselves because we're actually engaging in what it is that we need to be doing, not thinking about 15 other things. So we're going to conduct a poll. There are 3 questions in this poll. I'm going to, the results will be, sorry, the way that you deliver the answers or you give your answers will be managed by Stephanie. And then at the end of going through these 3 questions, we will have a quick overview of the results and then we'll move on.
All right, thanks, Anne. So the first poll, everyone, have you ever felt too uncomfortable to have a conversation with someone more senior? So the responses are either yes or no. So we'll close that poll and show the results.
Okay, so 95%, that's very high. So thank you everyone who answered that question.
The second poll, everyone, is have you ever had the conversation anyway, then felt it had a negative impact on you, your work relationships? Again, the responses are either yes or no. We'll close that poll and share the results.
Okay, so obviously a lot of you have had that conversation and we're still showing that we've got more times where it hasn't necessarily ended up the way that you've wanted it to. So thank you again.
The third poll, everyone, is would any negative impact from a conversation stop you from having much needed conversation meeting again? Again, the responses for this poll are yes or no. We'll close the poll and share the results.
Okay, so thank you everyone for that result as well. It's good to see that we've actually reduced the impact of having a negative or a conversation where there was a negative impact hasn't stopped as many people from having that conversation again as maybe some of the other results would have indicated. So we'll move on from that now. I'm going to come back to that again a little later in the webinar. Okay, so healthy conversations, being able to have that conversation that we need really comes back to how we communicate. So some of the simple things about communication, we have senders and receivers. So at the moment, I'm the sender, and anyone who's listening, I hope everyone's listening, anyone who's listening is the receiver. And when I hand over to Stephanie, for example, she becomes a sender and I become a receiver along with everybody else. So communication is a really dynamic process. We've always got the senders and receivers shifting and changing, particularly in an interactive meeting. So we need to make sure that we're practicing effective listening. And a part of the reason why we need to listen effectively is not only to understand what's being said, but also to show mutual respect for the people that we're communicating with. And healthy conversations really rely on mutual respect. The power of words is something that can never be underestimated. I'm a great believer in the meanings of words. So, for example, the reason that I talk about emotional health and not mental health is because for me, I still feel there's a big stigma around mental health. And I find that that expression at times can be a little bit grating. Whereas emotional health, it has a slightly different association with it, or in fact, no association whatsoever. Another way to look at it is Mother Teresa, when she used to continually be asked about being involved in causes or activities that were about eliminating war. One of the things that she famously said was that she didn't want to have anything to do with eliminating war. What she wanted to have something to do with was creating peace or moving towards peace. So the very difference between a word like war and peace can have a profound impact on a conversation. So what I'd encourage you to do is to think about how you use the words that you use by looking at how you respond to the words that other people use with you. And now there are also different communication styles, and I want to look at this in two different areas, if you like. One of them is that we can come across as being assertive, submissive, or aggressive. So that's how we're communicating. And then there's how we're communicating in our own way and our own personal style. And then there's the actual physical ways that we communicate. For example, face-to-face conversations versus telephone, SMS, email, and then we've got social media and letters, if anyone sends letters anymore. If we're going to communicate well, we've possibly all been tripped up by either sending or receiving an email which we've written in haste and somebody's misinterpreted the way that it was meant to be, interpreted it differently. So the rule of thumb for a really good conversation is really face-to-face first. Face-to-face, or then if you can't do face-to-face, is picking up the telephone. Or if you really do need to send an email or maybe even an SMS, what you do is you might write the email, make a call, have a conversation and say, I'm about to send this. Even if you leave a message, then what you do is you cover off any potential misinterpretation of the email. And that way you're still having healthy conversations. You're doing it using the medium that is available to you or necessary to you at that moment in time. So using our emotions and having a degree of courage and authentic communication, they're all wrapped in together. And one of the most important things to think about in any communication is the difference between being right and being kind. Now, Wayne Dyer, who was a wonderful speaker and presenter on all things to do with personal development and attitude, one of the things that he advocated was that if you've got the choice of being kind or being right, always pick being kind. And what that translates to is if you're having a conversation which you know maybe something which is going to have a not a good feel about it or deliver some bad news, then work out how you can do that in a kind way. Or if you're responding to someone who you can see really needs to know that you're caring about them, then focus on being kind and then work out how you deliver the message, because just being right doesn't necessarily leave a good taste in people with the conversation after. Okay, so what this really comes back to as well is where our focus is on the conversation. So if we're going to focus on being kind instead of just being right, then let's have a look at me-based and you-based communication. If any of you have come from a sales background, you may recognise this type of model as being a sales model, with how we communicate from initially talking to someone through to making a decision about a purchase. I expand it way further than that, because in reality, every conversation that we have is really about selling people something, an idea, a decision. Asking your kids to come down for dinner, or to stop what they're doing, that's selling them on the idea that that's a much better option than not doing it. Having a co-worker work with you on a project where you really need some help, it's not about saying I need this because I need it. It's about working with someone to see that it's going to be collaborative and really helpful for everybody to work together. So on the left-hand side, my needs first. What we're talking about is what I want. And this can be in the extreme, where you're in a situation where you know that you're talking to someone who just doesn't want to listen. Whereas when you're focusing on the other person's needs first, so you're in this case means the other person, what you're doing is you're needing to engage, and you're putting that engagement in as the first part of that whole communication. You're in that conversation with the other person. You're finding out what they might need, or what they might need to be able to see how they can help you, or even have them be willing to help you. And you work through the process of the conversation, getting them to understand that it's going to be helpful in a work situation to work together to get the outcome that you need. This also shows mutual respect. It says that I'm as important as you are, and the conversation will flow. Now, hopefully, you haven't been in the situation very many times where you're faced with this, what I call drill sergeant. I'm not sure if he actually is a drill sergeant, but that seems the appropriate title. Someone who is in a role where they are absolutely telling you how it is and looking like there is absolutely no opportunity for you to have a voice. So if we come back to our poll for a second, the poll showed that there were, in 95% of cases, we felt too uncomfortable to have a conversation with someone more senior. So this is probably a good graphic example of that, where the two men standing on the right, listening to their drill sergeant, are unlikely to turn around and say, actually, I don't agree, or I don't feel good about this conversation, or in fact, I don't want to be here. And then, of course, we said that if you've had the conversation anyway and then felt it had a negative impact, 83% of you said that that was the case. The good thing was that only 66% of you said that even though there'd been a negative impact on a conversation, that you wouldn't have the conversation again in the future. What happens, though, when you're in a situation where you just can't speak up? So what do you do when you can't speak up? That's a very, very real situation for a lot of people. And part of how Healthy Conversations came about as one of my focus points was watching people in work situations, and myself included at times, where you just felt that there was no value in having a conversation, either because it was the wrong time for that person, or purely because there was never a right time with that person. Now, it's very easy for some managers, dare I say it, some HR managers at times as well, might say, oh, well, if they don't like it, they can just leave. And the reality is, for a lot of people, that that's not possible, because we need to put food on the table, look after a family. There might be no jobs, and right underpinning all of it and coming straight back to emotional health can be the impact on confidence and low self-esteem, which means that you're not wanting to speak up, and then also has the impact of making you feel worse, either if you do or just because you can't. So what if it's not that easy? Well, if leaving isn't an option, which it isn't for many, many people, then it's really important to be able to say, how am I going to look after me? And that comes back to doing a good job and avoiding getting caught up with any other people in the organisation who might be negative about the organisation, or where there's any sort of grapevine, what I call a grapevine of dissent. So this is about being able to say, I recognise I can't have the conversation with the person that I need to, and that's okay, because right now I don't feel that it's safe or that there's any value. So do a good job. Do the work that you can do to the absolute best of your ability. Put on that happy face from a place of, I'm choosing to be happy right now, even though I'm not necessarily enjoying what I'm doing or don't necessarily want to be here. And an interesting thing will happen because you're doing that, and you're doing it with a great sense of awareness about it. Then your self-esteem and your confidence can improve. And before you know it, you may feel that you're in a much better situation than you were. So what are the final thoughts around this? Well, I don't know, some of you may have seen this diagram before, some of you may not. Quite simply, what it's saying is that where we are right now and where we want to get to are obviously two totally different things. And this can be before a conversation and the outcome that we'd like from a conversation. And what happens is that to get from one place to the other, or from one reality to the other, there's a degree of tension. And that tension, if we're not careful, it can cause us to go, oh, that's a bit too scary. I just want to bounce off it and go back to how things are now, even though that's not how I want things to be. So to be able to move past, or to move towards, I should say, where we really want to be and make some changes, comes back to how we look at knockbacks, having some courage and seeking out the uncomfortable. And I can't stress enough how sometimes just purely combining courage and maybe vulnerability and looking for other things that are uncomfortable can help you to move forward to having that tough conversation, to being able to feel better in yourself, and realizing that, as happened so many times, the conversation seemed worse before you had it than after you had it. So to finish off, the journey to emotional health and overall wellness is really an ongoing one. It takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes being able to communicate authentically, and it takes being able to embrace the uncomfortable, the challenges, and the learnings that come out of it. So what I'd like, and make it a rich and joyous journey along the way, because we're only here for one life, and to make each day as positive as it can be, and each day at work where we spend so much time, as safe and positive and engaging as it can be, makes life so much easier in every other area as well. So I guess my final point is, just remember that when it all seems too hard, the challenges that you have are challenges that many other people would love to have for themselves. We all think our challenges and our stories are so big, and they are, because they're our stories and our challenges. The reality is that we all have a story, and we all have an opportunity to make that story the way that we want it, maybe more than we realise. So to finish off, there's one other handout which you'll get at the end of the presentation, which is called my Work Health Life Balance Guide, or Getting Started Guide, which has a few tips on how to address all of those areas that are covered in the Barometer. So thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Anne. So there is now an opportunity for you to submit your questions to Anne. So please type any questions that you have in the questions pane. And also, as Anne mentioned, there are some handouts as well, which will be emailed to those individuals who attended today's webinar as well. Today's webinar has been recorded 2, so that recording will be made available after WorkSafe Month on the WorkSafe Tasmania website.
Excellent. So do we have any questions?
Yes, Anne, a question has come through. Does outcome and, sorry, I'm going to read it out. does
Yes, no,
out
that's okay.
does outcome out and do workplace training? So maybe do you go out and do workplace training?
Oh,
Might be
okay.
the question.
Yes. Yes, that is one of the things that I do. I focus on working with small teams, large teams, individuals, depending on what the needs are and what the business is, I guess in some cases as well. And that's one of the
Okay.
things, if you want to make any queries about that, then you can certainly direct the queries through WebSafe through Stephanie at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, so if anyone does have any further questions that you would like sent to Anne, my details will be sent to individuals who have participated in today's webinar a couple of days after the presentation.
Excellent.
So we don't appear to have any other questions come through yet, so I'll start to do my wrap up. So thank you, Anne Whatley-Dale, Founder, Principal and Managing Director of Livepresent, for today's webinar, Emotional Health Through Healthy Conversation. There is still time, everyone, to register for other WorkSafe Month webinars and events. Also, at the close of today's webinar, you will receive a short survey on the presentation, and we appreciate you providing us with your feedback. So on behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and our presenter, Anne Whatley-Dale from Livepresent, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.